Speaking of which, there is this meme going around about the Donald Trumpster that is in like every paper about how suddenly Trump is unleashed. You know, before he was being held back by his advisors, but now he's cleaned out all of his advisors and he's only surrounded himself with people he likes, which translates into people the media doesn't like. And this is just, oh my gosh, now everything is going to go kerflooey, you know. Some guy, a guy named Matthew Walther, who writes for The Week, and he hates Donald Trump. And he wrote a piece called Why Trump is More Popular Than Ever. And I just want to read a little bit of this because it's finally it's like a little light bulb going on in a journalist's mind. He says, it's not surprising that after a little more than a year in office, many people who voted for the president still support him. But it's surprising that a president who has been the object of more negative reporting than any in our history still enjoys something like the same middling base of support he had before taking office, unless it's the negative reporting that is, in his mind, the problem, which I suspect is very largely the case. You can only ask, in other words, he's saying that the hysterical anti-Trump reporting is making Trump more popular. Drudge had him at 51%. I think that must be Rasmussen. He's usually seen around 42 or 46, somewhere in there. But still, his popularity is going up. So this guy says, you know, you can only ask adults to participate in the fiction that a retweet of a wrestling gif is a credible threat of violence against some nerd reporters at a cable station, or delight in what you hope will be the failure of American trade policy before they decide to tune you out. Very largely, this had already happened by Inauguration Day. By now, the work of MSNBC and the New York Times and PolitiFact is complete. Millions of Americans do not know the difference between what is true and what is false and have decided that they do not much care. There was, I like fondly to imagine, a different course that might have been taken here. It is just possible, I suppose, that members of my profession, journalism, could have exercised their reasoning faculties to decide what in the administration was good and what was bad. We chose not to exercise this responsibility. So this meme is going around. It was in both the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal today. Here's Trump. He's talking and he says he'd like to pull our troops out of Syria because ISIS has been largely cleaned up. So here is Trump saying that to a reporter.
I want to get out. I want to bring our troops back home. I want to start rebuilding our nation. We will have, as of 3 months ago, $7 trillion in the Middle East over the last 17 years. Nothing out of it. Nothing.
So here's the New York Times reporting on this. On foreign policy, President Trump reverts to candidate Trump. Now, you could translate that into non-Timesian English to say President Trump is trying to uphold his promises as a candidate, because what he's doing is he's fulfilling his America First agenda, pulling us out of foreign wars he thinks are done, and he thinks we're not getting out of them. But this is the New York Times. President Trump has been commander-in-chief for 14 months, but to an uncanny degree, he still sounds like the armchair statesman who ran for the White House in 2016, far from learning on the job or modifying his views to fit the imperatives of America's global role, as did so many of his predecessors. Mr. Trump is falling back on the familiar mix of belligerence and isolationism that fueled his America First campaign. So by, being who he said he was, he is doing something terrible. And yet he sounds very much like another president I used to know who sounded a little bit like this. This is cut number 5.
American workers built this country. And now we need American workers to rebuild this country. That's what we need. It is time we take some of the money that we spend on wars, use half of it to pay down our debt, and then use the rest of it to do some nation building right here at home.
So that was Obama saying the same thing. It's time to come home. It's time to help the American workers. And the reason we were in Syria, lest we forget, is because Obama pulled out of Iraq, because Obama let the Syrian civil war go on without doing anything. And Obama basically, remember, said ISIS, it's the JV team. We don't have to fight ISIS. It's no big deal. And they set the entire Middle East on fire. So how did the New York Times cover Obama pulling out of Iraq? President Obama, listen to this. This is from 2011. President Obama, who first ran for office campaigning against the war, has never wavered on his promise to bring the troops home. The last few thousand will be out of Iraq by year's end. We celebrate their return, but this country must never forget the intolerable costs of a war started on arrogance and lies. So Obama keeping his campaign promise, and he did. It was a stupid promise, and he kept it. That was a sign of integrity and honesty. But Trump keeping his campaign promise is the worst thing ever. And, this is true on everything Trump does, everything he does. It's not judged like the guy said, oh, is this policy good or is this policy bad? It's judged on Trump. It must be bad because Trump did it. It's like gluten in that Seth Rogen film, This Is the End, where he says, you don't know what gluten is. And Rogen says, sure I do. Gluten is everything bad. That's the way they treat Donald Trump. And so they do this. Also, there's a piece in the Wall Street Journal, same pieces in the New York Times. Trump plunges ahead with America First nationalist approach, and he blames the fact that all these guys have been fired. This is Gerald Seib. He blames the fact that all the guys were fired and that not enough is getting done in the Senate and Congress. And by the way, I don't want to get too deep into the political weeds about this, but Mitch McConnell is to blame for a lot of stuff that's going on because he is slow walking everything. He is playing it so safe that nothing gets done. And Trump decides, well, I don't need to negotiate. I don't need to compromise. I don't need to talk to anybody because they're not doing anything anyway. And he goes off on his own. So again, there's this caravan of people heading for the border. And Trump says he's going to call the National Guard and send them in to defend the border. Here's Trump just saying that.
Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military. That's a big step. We really haven't done that before, or certainly not very much before. But we will be doing things with Mexico, and they have to do it. Otherwise, I'm not going to do the NAFTA deal. NAFTA's been fantastic for Mexico, bad for us. We've had our car plants moved to Mexico, many of them. We make tremendous numbers, millions of cars in Mexico that years ago didn't exist. They closed in Michigan, they closed in Ohio, they closed in other places. Now they're starting to move back because of what we've done with regulation and with taxes. They're starting to come back into our country in a big way. But I told Mexico very strongly, you're going to have to do something about these caravans that are coming up. And I just noticed that the caravan now, which is toward the middle of Mexico, coming up from Honduras, is breaking it up very rapidly. That's because Mexico has very strong immigration laws, as we should have.
So obviously this is because he's racist, because he hates Mexicans, because he's starting a war on the Mexican border. But let's listen to another president I used to know talking about the border as well when he was not president, but when he was campaigning. This is cut number 4.
We all agree on the need to better secure the border and to punish employers who choose to hire illegal immigrants. We are a generous and welcoming people here in the United States, but those who enter the country illegally and those who employ them disrespect the rule of law, and they are showing disregard for those who are following the law. We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked, and circumventing the line of people who are waiting patiently, diligently, and lawfully to become immigrants in this country. So that's why we need to start by giving agencies charged with border security new technology, new facilities, and more people to stop, process, and deport illegal immigrants.
And that guy is tough on those illegal immigrants, isn't he? He must not. I don't think he likes Mexicans very much. I think that's the problem with him. All I'm saying is that Trump is doing what he said he would do, and Obama lied. Obama said he was going to do stuff that he didn't do. He did not stop the border and then blamed us for wanting our borders to be secure. I mean, here, I'll give it to you in a nutshell. I'll give it to you in one clip, okay? Scott Pruitt, EPA guy, right? He is dialing back some of the mileage standards that the Obama administration had. And anything that involves the environment, it must be good, right? Anything Obama did that involved the environment. Listen to the way CBS reports this. I mean, you want to talk about fake news. Listen to the way that CBS reports them dialing back these Obama regulations. And then I'll tell you what the regulations really are.
The EPA will announce plans today to reverse Obama-era fuel standards meant to fight air pollution. The move sets up a showdown with environmental groups. The Trump administration is set to roll back one of President Barack Obama's signature policies on the environment. The move comes from the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, that's Scott Pruitt.
Today, Pruitt is expected to announce a reversal of tougher Obama-era standards for rules on greenhouse gas emissions and fuel economy. That would set up a showdown with lawmakers and environmental groups.
Meanwhile, the White House is reportedly reviewing reports that Pruitt paid a below-market rate to live in a Washington condo tied to an energy industry lobbyist, that is. Chief Brady is at the White House with more. Chip, good morning.
Well, good morning. Pruitt says rolling back greenhouse gas emission and fuel economy standards will help not only the car industry, but also consumers. But it's expected to ignite a firestorm of criticism here in Washington.
A firestorm of criticism that hasn't happened yet, but they're reporting on the future. But that's not what is so dishonest about that. First, these ethics violations that everybody's coming at Scott Pruitt on are completely political. They are completely political. That apartment that he was using, he got it at a market rate. The person who gave it to him did not have any business in front of the EPA at the time. They're talking about his travel expenses, which are less than previous EPA administrator travel expenses. This is a hit job on Pruitt, and I hope the president knows it is, because Pruitt is doing an excellent job dialing back and completely overweening EPA. Secondly, the signature legislation of the Obama era is absolute garbage. This thing, they basically misused a Nixon-Carter era CAFE standards, they call them, corporate average fuel economy standards, that was from back from the 70s when they had gas shortages and people were waiting online for gas. And they misused this to mandate a fleet-wide average of 54.5 miles a gallon, a number they made up completely. In fact, the 0.5 was like a little dig at the car industry. It was just a joke. You were allowed to get around these standards by selling electric cars at below cost, so and losing money. So the car industry was supposed to lose money to serve the government's electric car agenda, which is not, is fascism, basically. It's the government telling businesses how to run themselves. And I don't mean fascism like a curse word. I mean literal fascism, where the government is telling business how it's run, instead of communism, where they just take the business over. These regulations were a complete joke. They were complete. They did very, very little for the environment. They had very, very little environmental effect. And this kind of outrage that's going on is just Obama good, Trump bad. All right, I'll wind up what I'm talking about with Trump and so I can get to the mailbag. Bobby Jindal, former Louisiana governor, he wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal that just sums it up. He says Trump keeps his predecessor's promises. He says, true enough, President Trump has wrapped his policy proposals in harsher rhetoric than his predecessors, and he threatens to go much further than they contemplated. It's also true, however, that many of his actions were previously promised by Democrats and Republicans alike. Now that there's a politician who finally seems to be doing in office what he pledged to do when campaigning, voters can be forgiven for supporting him and for wondering why this makes him or them deplorable. Obama even said he was going to, and so did Hillary, say that she was going to renegotiate NAFTA. That's supposed to be such a shocking thing. Jindal goes on to say the lesson is that rhetoric matters. Establishment politicians have been borrowing nationalist rhetoric to win elections and then maintaining the same old activist foreign policy, free trade, and lax immigration enforcement. They have spent years offering cheap talk with no intention of following through. Now they are shocked that Mr. Trump, an outsider, does not play their sophisticated game. If they believe in a liberal, multilateral world order governed by institutions and rules they see as being threatened by Mr. Trump's ethos of American first, they should make that case, but they should trust voters enough to do it honestly. Basically, the media cannot believe that the voters meant what they said, that Trump meant what they said. And I've talked about Trump's style and how often I don't like his style. I've talked about some of the things he does that I don't like. But this is what he ran on, and this is what he's doing. And it is simply, and so much of it was promised by his predecessors. And either the media knew they were lying or didn't care they were lying because they were Democrats. And so Obama good, Trump bad, that is the reporting. And of course, Trump's popularity will rise if they continue to do that.